introduce Simon Richards, who's going to give us Dominica, which is an abbreviated, severely abbreviated, I should say, show that he gave to the Royal earlier in the year, and I'm sure you're going to have a fantastic display, so I'll hand over to Simon.
Thank you, Graham, and it's lovely to see so many of you here. As I said, I did 588 pages for the Royal back in February, and you've got about 192 here, so less than half. And I thought, what would you like to focus on? And I thought, well, I'll stick mainly with the classics and the De La Rue issues. And the last two frames are something completely different because I haven't shown them before. They don't end up on the club displays, and it's registration labels. So it's something totally different. Classic stuff and then something completely esoteric. There were lots of different chapters. Could have done the whole thing on George VI, which is a fascinating period for Dominica. But if you want that, you'll have to invite me to come and display it in the club. So this is really just I've left the postal history behind as well, because I think I showed some of that 2 or 4 years ago. So we've mainly got the De La Rue issues. Dominica, it's the largest, really, of the British possessions in the Antilles chain, extremely mountainous, as a result left well alone by the European powers until the end, really, of the 7 Years' War, when it was no longer neutral, it could no longer be left to the native peoples. Though there is still the largest native reservation on the island, if you go there today. So, balance between French and English influence. The Roseau is still the capital. It's a Catholic island. The population is around 70,000 a day, very similar to Antigua in terms of population. The youngsters on Dominica want to get to Antigua. You get to Antigua, they want to get to New York or London. Dominica, although like with most of the West Indies islands, the post office on the island authorities took over the responsibility from 1860. It was rather slow to introduce postage stamps, and they didn't get round to introducing them until 1874. And they picked up the St Kitts, St Christopher, Victoria head. It was a sort of semi-key plate design, in that you've got the value tablet was interchangeable, but you had to recarve the country. Ultimately, De La Rue went to producing the stamps where you change both the country and the value tablet. So we've got some of the early essays and specimens cancelled. The 1874, it's pre-UPU, so we have just 3 denominations, a penny, sixpence and shilling. They came out Perth 12.5 on CC paper. Then 1877 goes to Perth 14 with the change of the perforating machines, and then 1883 change of watermark. So you see the designs going through there. There's some quite interesting covers. There's a 6-penny single usage, which is scarce, but it's all about ornithology. Somebody went on a trip around the Caribbean islands and discovered quite a number of species of new bird, and he's writing back to a young lady in Virginia. So that's quite a nice letter. There's a couple of bisects in there, and some interesting rates. There's one letter to Holland in that early period, which is, it should have been a shilling packet rate, threepence to Holland, rebated a penny, so 1 and 2pence to Holland. France, the postage was 1 shilling, 2pence, halfpenny, rebated a penny to a shilling, penny, halfpenny. Of course, no halfpenny stamps, so what do? They bisected them. And there's 4 or 5 known of the Perth 14 and 3 of the Perth 12.5. And there's a couple there used with different stamps, both ex-Charles Freeland. We get to the UPU period. Dominica, with the rest of the Leeward Islands, joined the UPU on the 1st of July 1879. Nobody really had told them they were joining the UPU on the the 1st of July, so there was a reduction in the packet rate from 6pence to 4pence, but no stamps, 4p stamps, were available. They also needed a Tutley Halfpenny denomination at that time and a halfpenny. So we get, to slightly piece it together, but there's 3 covers there. One, September 1879, where the 4p rate's paid by 4 1p stamps. That used up all the 1p stamps. In the fiscal bit, you'll see there's an October 1879 cover, where there's 4 revenue stamps used postally. And in November, you can find a single usage 4p over there because the stamps had finally arrived. There's some varieties on the 4p blue that are worth looking at, and you think the 4p blue is almost the most common stamp to find used at Dominica. Find any multiples, pretty tricky. I think there's one mint block on the floor. I've got a mint pair up there. Finding them dated, also quite difficult, because there was the A07 killer, and I know Michael Hamilton puts on his database the individually dated examples you can find used. They're that scarce, it's worth recording the date. So significant premium in that period for date stamped stamps. So worth having a look at that. I've got the only double rate known from the period there of the 4p in blue, and later on you'll find there's a double rate of the 4p grey. Dominica did eventually adopt the UPU colour scheme slowly from 1886, and strangely, although there was a penny lilac on CA, theoretically it was sent out with others. Well, it was sent out by Delarue at the same time as the halfpenny and tuppence halfpenny. It's not known used before 1886. So if you find one of these ones with the date stamp earlier than 1886, we all want to know about it. What really happened? You can find the others, and there's some quite nice usages there. The last issues are very scarce of, when you think of a fairly standard stamp, but trying to find used 6p or shillings, they really were printed in very small quantities, only came out in 1890, and on the 31st of October 1890 they were all invalidated, as they decided as an economy measure to standardise on Leeward Island stamps for all the constituent parts of all the 6 presidencies. So then we go to Leeward Island stamps, which were then the only stamps you could use between October 1890 and July 1903. The one exception to that, and I bought a frame that I don't normally bring down, mainly for Bill, of the revenue stamps, largely postally used. There's a scarce revenue penny at the end there, which find 8 or 9 examples. There are those. I think there's definitely more than one sheet of it done, because you can find both shades. There's got to be 2 sheets. But anyway, there's a few examples there, and they were allowed and do carry on being used a little bit into the 1890s. And occasionally you can find philatelic usages as late as 1912, but they're not really philatelic. I don't think that's going on. A couple of complete panes. If you're exhibiting, always important to make sure your most important items in the middle of the frame. So for those of you looking at it, that's there. And that is the error. There were various overprints, and you'll see them there. In 1883, there's a batch of halfpennies. 1886, another period of doing overprints, and the halfpenny was printed on the 6p because they didn't really need the 6p green stamps, nor the shilling because post-UPU much demand, and the 1p on the shilling. And there's some interesting varieties of the 1p on the shilling there. But the one that gets everybody excited and has the highest catalogue listing is the sheet that was done 1p on 6p. And the value tablet was gone through with a rule bar. On the top row, the rule bar was put in with the thick end in to do the overprinting. they realised that didn't look as they'd expected, so they then turned it round, and all the other rows are done with the thin bar. Though strangely, all 6 of the thick bar from the top row have survived, because they were all put on one envelope, with actually 2 thin bar ones making up an 8pence double rate, sent back to Essex. And the thin bar one I have there is one bought at a study circle auction, and it's actually still got a part of the envelope with it. But the one above it also went on both they were the 2 on the top right hand corner of that particular envelope, which somebody's attempted to reconstruct in Victor's book. So then we get this Leeward Island gap period, which I've not brought along today, and then, having saved money, the colonies were starting to think, hang on a minute, our revenue's down. You know, costs may be down, but revenue's down, and is this really such a good thing? And all those philatelists are not buying. So they started lobbying. The Virgin Islands jumped the gun and didn't care, but the rest of them wanted to go actually make sure that legally they were allowed to issue stamps. And from 1901, all the islands, the Leeward Islands, submitted designs back to De La Rue. It all actually went in on the same order. So you've got here the reference here for 6801, and so it's the same for the Christopher, it's the same for Antigua, it's all of that order. And you've got, I think this is the ex-archive piece that Dominica sent in. It's a view of the capital from the sea, and you get in 1902, they've made it up into some essays which you see here. And then there's a bit of a hiatus, because the production doesn't really get going again for almost a year, because somebody said, well, hang on a minute, they still haven't enacted the legislation to allow the introduction of stamps. Well, we can't spend any more money on that. So it all ground to a halt for a period. And so it wasn't until June 1903 the law was passed, an order in council was made, stamps were able to be sent out bearing the name of the presidency. Same applied in all the islands. And the one thing you'll find in common of the designs is poor old Edward VII, he hasn't got his head on the stamps. I mean, Queen Victoria's everywhere there. Edward VII, he doesn't appear. It's all this tourism. I mean, he's obviously on the Leeward Island ones, but he missed out there. So we get the view of Roseau from the sea. There's quite a lot of proof material here, quite a few colour trials. These ones I've turned around because they're the same shade, but they show the watermark in the margin of Crown. Well, they've got the WN of Crown and the EN of agents. And I think there must be one somewhere which has got the 2 letters in between. There is this theory about whether they were done in mini sheetlets of 6. I mean, presumably they did a whole sheet and then just cut down and retained 6, but that's always an interesting discussion. There's before Hardings, after Hardings. The Appendix A I've got there, the leads, and there's a specimen set there with from one of the Portuguese archives. After that, it's shown by value, which is what the judges thought was better. And occasionally, particularly with the halfpenny, it's quite difficult to tell because they were printed, again, for reasons of economy on CC paper initially, because it still had some left, even though it was obsolete, because not many people printed with this size stamp. Most of them were the smaller size, so they still had this left. Then it went to the multiple crown CA, and the scarcest is the one you issued just after the war, a multiple script CA paper. All the remainders were destroyed, so used copies with the script CA paper, definitely scarce. George Holshire would certainly think they're worth full catalogue. There's various bits here of the war tax overprints Dominica had to pay for its contribution to the war effort, mainly used as labourers when they got to the Western Front. And so from the first, I think it's the day of the song, anyway, mid-1916 through till 1922, a war tax applied, put the standard rate up to penny halfpenny. So the twopence halfpenny stamp, which is in blue, was printed in orange, an overprinted war tax penny halfpenny initially, then a penny halfpenny initially. And of course, after the war, they're still trying to pay off the debts, so they didn't reduce the postage rates. So they needed a penny halfpenny stamp, so that's why you get a new design here. Initially, they did it 1 penny, halfpenny, which didn't find favour with the authorities, so that's rejected. And then they had to put the value as well in the corners, as well as writing 1 penny, halfpenny. And you can see the development of that there. I've tried to show some of the shades, and for most of them, you get these mini blocks of 4, which I need to highlight differently, in perf, which are the sort of the plate proofs for each of them. I've got them all bar 2 values. One of them I've got a single, one of them I'm still missing. But again, I think these were in sheets of 6 initially retained, because you can see them in one of the early sales as a 6, and they've been cut down. And although the books say they have all been likely to have been cut up, I have got blocks of 4 at most, so they haven't. And finally, Edward VII gets a look in. Common design was done, and this is the master one for Antigua, Montserrat, and Dominica. So doesn't have the country yet put on, the head and the frame, and some colour trials there. And there we see him on the 2 watermarks. And of course, that was the one that did need to be changed when George V came to the throne for the latter part of this issue, so that you get one there with George V's head in. There's another plate-proof block of 4 there. George V, after, I think it probably was the first post-war UPU Congress, concluded that you could issue commemorative type stamps, and they were valid internationally. So in the 1920s, I think this drove everybody to have a new issue, a new design, possibly also the post-war era. So we get this twin medallion design, and George V definitely making sure, as a philatelist, his head's on it. It adopts aspects of the seal, and again, I think this is ex-De La Rue Archives. That's the one that graced the front cover of Stephen Sugarman's sale as a design. And again, there's quite a lot of proofs here. This is a set of proofs not in Victor Towing's book, though it is ex-Charles Freeland. So, and it is known from Grenada and St Kitts, and possibly 1 or 2 of the other islands. And I think producing these grey proofs was something De La Rue adopted in the 20s, though I've not got any documentary evidence about it. The twin medallion design, you've got the vignette in the middle, and you've got a frame. So there's a frame for each of the values, and the vignette is constant. And what that gives rise to are frame floors, which are actually quite scarce, because the frame part wasn't used as often, and vignette floors, which become more common and more progressive, because the vignette floors had to be used the whole time for each of the values. So there's a lot more strikings. So this is arranged to show the values, first of all, going through progressively, some of them illustrated with some floors, and then in the latter frames of this, it should show some usages where possible, and in the latter bit concentrates on the floors that you can find on the frames and on the vignettes. You'll notice as well with this set, there's a lot more values than in the previous one. And again, a pound value. What on earth was the need for that? I mean, it's purely there to fleece philatelists. And anyway, there's no 10 shillings, so we'd be grateful for that. 3 shillings, 4 shillings, 5 shillings, a pound. But nonetheless, not really necessary. But again, they're still economy driven. Some of them are printed on, most of them are script CA watermark paper, but some of the 3 shillings, 5 shillings, pound were printed on Crown CA paper. Again, they've got some left. so it needed using up. Every sheet had to be accounted for. So you go through the various usages. Now, the work here on floors is largely thanks to Roger West, who wrote a big article and illustrated all of this in the bulletin in 2006. And I was lucky enough to buy most of this stuff from his collection when it got sold in New York. And actually he came to my display in Matlock and was quite pleased to see some of his stuff. It seemed a shame I had to go all the way to New York to come back to England, but there we go. So a lot of this is really thanks to him. He did much of the work. He pioneered it on the Centolina ship types and hoped to find as many varieties, but didn't. Some of them are reasonably prominent, some are really quite obscure. And none of them have yet achieved catalogue status, though they are constant. And some of them might be worthy of it. I mean, take a look and see. I've tried to have blown up illustrations of them. Some of them, I think, like this one on the penny, where there's a white floor coming down from the foot of the one, that's quite prominent. Because it's coloured on the frame, some of the breaks are reasonably visible. Once you get into the vignettes, some of the scratches are difficult. Obscure might be another word for it. Yeah. You get the odd nick in the frame. But it's quite interesting also looking at, well, when did these happen? Well, for this particular floor here, I've got 13 of the 15 positions on specimen stamps. So that floor was there right from the beginning. Whereas you'll get other floors that only come through on the later printings of the halfpenny and the penny, where they would continue to print them right into the late 30s, and they're progressive. So where you find it on specimens, you know it's there at the beginning. You know, if you can find it on the tuppence halfpenny before the colour change, you know, again, that's a fairly early floor. And it's possible to go through the printings and, as I say, obscure, but, you know, somebody's got to do it. And I think it was quite nice to keep it together. I have found a couple more, and a couple we've now been able to position, because what you also need are positional pieces to show, you know, just where on the sheet was it found. And this material does exist in sufficient mint blocks, whole sheets. I mean, I've even got whole sheets of the 3 shillings and the 5 shillings. You know, this one's sheet number 2 from a printing. And if you're fed up with all of that, there's a couple of interesting airmail covers in here, tucked in. So you can see some of these values were used for the early airmails from Dominica there. I'm trying to be careful not to talk too much. I'll check out over time. Yes, so I do want to give you a decent amount of time to have a look at the material before lunch. So that the final couple of frames here, this is a subject that was not initially covered in the notes for Philatelis in the Leeward Island book, but in the second edition, Rob Winstra had done some work on the registration labels for all the Leeward Islands, and this was looked at, this section on Dominica, tried to illustrate it, to look at the date range you've got. I have got over 150 registered covers to start going through all of this and trying to expand the date range. So there's some notes there. More of it was written up in the Royal Handout. James wisely bought an extra copy that was in the bucket there for £1, because they cost me £10 each to print. But there are only 150, and it's not cropped up that often since. And there is original research in that booklet that's not being published, so I might get around to doing something with the bulletin. The final few pages, where there is definitely quite a lot of work more to be done are on the village registration councils. And there's only one that Rob Winster has highlighted from Portsmouth, but you get Portsmouth, Dominica, there's two different fonts there, but you also get Dominica, Portsmouth. I've got them here from Grand Bay and Marigot, and having had a chat with Peter McCann at Stampex, who's also now doing the postal history of Dominica, he's got one or two more. They also had a square type of, an oblong type first of all, there was a lozenge type, and how those progressed through and what dates they were introduced. Not all that many offices in the George VI period, and there's definitely more to be done. And although some of those covers are philatelic, without people like Roger Wells getting them sent back to them, we wouldn't have the material to look at all and try and find out when these hand stamps were introduced. So if you want a bit of light relief and a couple of frames that don't normally get seen, they're those two at the end. And I think, to be honest, you're probably better spending the time having a look than listening to me. So with that...
James, could you provide the thanks just before you look?
Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, as it's been mentioned, this is a small selection, but superb selection of what Simon showed at the Royal. And for those of you who are lucky enough to go there, and encourage them to join the Royal, is you get some fantastic handouts. And I have to say, the handout that Simon produced for the Royal was superb. I mean, and well worth having.
I've copied yours.
Of course, you've got yes. I would like to say that compared with the Cayman Islands, Dominica issued their stamps very early. You said they were late. No, they were very early. But I don't care anymore. That's it, yeah. In the Queen Victoria section, the early section, a superb material. The colours and the quality of the actual stamps themselves, both the mint and used, are exceptional. The postal history is wonderful, correct rates, fantastic routing, well worth looking at and appreciating the quality of that. The postal fiscals in the last frame on that side there, really nice to see. Again, vibrant colours, a couple of items that used to be in my collection, well worth looking at. For the Rosso from the Sea issue, there is this absolutely, it's top quality. If that was just an exhibit by itself, it's top quality. You've got the die proofs, the colour trials, essay work, all the materials there. It stands alone. It is really, really good to see. And some lovely postal history to go with it. The twin medallion issue that replaced it. So lucky for the King to get his head on these ones. Again, it could stand alone as a display by itself. It's absolutely wonderful. It's all there. You don't need to go anywhere else to see it. Top quality item, some really good collections, Sugarman. Some fantastic provenance for nearly all the material here. And then, as Simon said, the light relief at the end, where he's put a lot of research into the registration labels and where it's going to go from there. Just a bit back on the floors. It takes a lot of pressure on the catalogue editor to get a floor in there, as I know, but I finally succeeded. So yeah, it takes a lot of work. And again, positional piece is very important. But all in all, it has been a superb display, and the talk that we've got, history, the material, brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Fantastic.
Thank you, James.